Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm taking a look at my currently inked pens. Now, when I was teaching full-time, 2 pens was the ideal number of pens to have inked up at one time. I usually had one, I called it my one serious pen, which had a blue or a black or some darker color in it, and I had a fun pen. Now, that was the pen that I used for grading papers. It had a fun colored ink in it. When I retired, I quickly learned that one pen was ideal to have inked up at one time. And part of that is, I just don't do quite as much writing. And I like to use pen and ink combinations that can be finicky if you don't write with them every day. And I'll get into that a little bit more with some of these pen and ink combinations that I've got going right now. But I wanted to go ahead and do a currently inked because all but one of these pens is getting ready to get cleaned out. So I wanted to discuss what my experience has been with each one of these before I clean them out. I'm going to begin with my Pilot Vanishing point. I've got Colorverse Dark Energy in here, and prior to the pen show, this was the only pen that I had inked up for quite a while. In fact, I went through one fill of Dark Energy and refilled it. I've got a cartridge in here that I filled with an ink syringe, and I've been using this to do math problems for review. I'm going to try to do a little bit of tutoring this school year, and so I'm just reviewing. And in fact, I'm using an A4 size pad of Midori paper. It's a little bit off-white, so this kind of dark reddish ink, almost brown, on off-white paper kind of reminds me of Leonardo da Vinci's writings, his notebooks. The only problem is when I came back from the pen show, I've got all these pens inked up. I haven't been using it every day, and this really saturated Dark Energy. Dark Energy is a super saturated ink. It's prone to drying out in the pen if you don't use the pen every day. I wrote with this yesterday, but I had to work on it to get it writing again. So let's see how it does today. Okay, it's doing pretty good, and it feels really nice. This is a 18 karat fine pilot nib. I am very fond of Pilot gold fine nibs. The fine nib on my old Custom 74 was the first gold nib that I used that made me say, okay, now I get why people like gold nibs so much. And I like this nib even better. Pilot fine nibs, a lot of the gold fine nibs that I've used have this characteristic where the upstroke is drier than all the other strokes. And with some ink and paper combinations, you can kind of feel that, and it can be a little unpleasant. But you see on this Vanishing Point fine nib, the upstroke is just as wet as the rest of the strokes, and I really noticed that on that Midori pad that I was talking about. On that Midori paper, my Custom Heritage 92 just feels a little unpleasant because the upstroke is just a little too dry. And that's when I'm using this Colorverse Dark Energy. Now, with other inks, I don't notice it as much. That dry upstroke gives the writing some character, and so at times it can be pleasant. But with this particular ink and that particular paper, it's just not as pleasant. But with the Vanishing point, this ink is very enjoyable on that Midori paper. The only problem is, like I said, I have to write with it every day or it gets a little dry. I was kind of hoping that it would do it today so I could demonstrate, but when it gets a little dry like that, I just dip the nib, either dip it in water, just dip it a little bit, let it kind of soak in some, or if you have just a little stream of water in the sink, just kind of stick it under there for a second, stick the nib under there for a second, just the tip of the nib. It'll soak some of that water up. Let it resaturate the ink. Maybe scribble on a scrap sheet of paper and let some of the watery ink get drawn out, and you'll be able to see when it gets back to the normal saturation. That's what I had to do yesterday. It was pretty dry, and you see today it's writing beautifully. Now the next pen I have inked up is my Bexley sleeve filler. It also has an 18 karat nib. This one is a stub, and I've had a lot of trouble with this one. I've talked about this before. It had some pretty serious baby's bottom or over polishing when I first got it. And I've heard, I did my research before I bought this pen, and other people had the same trouble with that stub nib. And silly me, I've done this before with other pens, did not heed the warnings of the reviews, and I could have gotten a medium nib on this pen, but I really wanted a stub nib. I didn't have many stub nibs in my collection, and I paid the price for it. I've had lots of trouble with this skipping and hard starts. I did some work on it myself. I watched some videos. It's better than it was, but it's not perfect. I've tried different inks with varying results, but I had never tried any Waterman ink in it. So before I went to the pen show, I wanted to try some Waterman ink in it because I thought I might take this and have it worked on. So I inked it up with Waterman Mysterious Blue. And this is another one. You kind of have to, if you write with it every day, it does pretty good. I did a little scribbling with this yesterday, and it did okay. We'll see how it does today. Okay, you see that hard start, but let's see now. This is very wet. It's a little wetter than I would prefer. I'll do the ink. I'll write the name of the ink in reverse. Now that I like. I don't know if you'll be able to tell it on the video. It's a little bit drier, or I can demonstrate it. Here's regular. Oh, another hard start. Let me try that again. Oh, man. I might be getting low on ink. I think it's actually a little wetter than that. But here's the reverse. Oh, that's dry now. I think I'm about to run out of ink. But you see the reverse writing is drier than the regular writing, and I like the line width of this. I like stubs, but I don't like them to be too broad. The reverse writing is ideal. I really like it. But I ended up not taking it to the pen show to get worked on. It's better than it was if I write with Mysterious Blue, and I've kind of noticed that I don't have many sleeve fillers. All of them except for this one. I don't think this is considered a vintage pen, but all of my sleeve fillers except for this one are vintage, and they all seem to prefer Waterman ink. So I think that's just what I'll do when I'm using not a sleeve filler. I should have said a sack filler, a pen that has a rubber sack for the ink. Those tend to write best with the Waterman ink. So I think I'm just going to stick with those and not put any more money into that Bexley. Now let's get into the pens that I acquired at the pen show. This Pro Gear with an 18 karat medium fine nib. This pen is a little bit larger than the Pro Gear Slim. I never thought that this would be the size of pen that would be ideal for me. I thought the Pro Gear Slim would be my ideal size because I have kind of small hands, but I just really love the size of this pen. I enjoy the nib. The nib is a little bit larger than the nib that is on the Pro Gear Slim, and you can feel a little bit more bounciness to it. I think part of that is just the longer tines. It's a larger nib, and it's 21 karat instead of 14 karat. I'm just loving this pen. I love the color. It's got sparkles in it, but it's very subtle. I don't know if it's even going to show up, those sparkles. And I love the ink that I have it inked up with. Let me go ahead and write this. There was a little bit of a hard start there, but you see, I am basically out of ink. The only ink left in it is the ink that's in the feed. And I can feel it's writing a little dry. I can tell I'm getting low on ink. Yeah, I think it would normally be a little bit wetter than that. Let's see, and this is Tasha Hokusai Benetsuchi. I've been really impressed. I haven't tried many Tasha inks, but I've been really impressed with the ones that I did try. This pen and ink combination, I am just loving it. Next, I've got a Twsbi VAC 700R. It's inked up with Iroshizuku Murasaki Shikibu, and it just looks so nice with the little splashes of purple throughout the trim of this pen. And this has an extra fine stainless steel nib with that rainbow, I guess you would call it a rainbow two-tone. Just beautiful. Now, when I wrote with this the first time, it felt a little scratchy. So I did some smoothing with it, on it with some micro mesh, and it was smooth, but there was just something about it. The nib just didn't have any character. I think I've been spoiled by my gold nibs being a little bit bouncy. Your writing's just not that a round nib can just write so uniform that it's, I don't know. I've written with some nibs that, some steel nibs that, like the steel nibs on my Leonardo, those number 6 Yovo nibs. I don't know. Let me write this real quick. But as I wrote with it, I smoothed it and I got it really smooth, and I'm like, oh, it's a little bit too smooth. So I used my ceramic sharpening stone to just kind of, I just wrote over it a couple times to rough it back up a little bit, just to give it a little texture. And I'm like, I like the feel of it, but there's just something about it. And I was tempted to make it, to do some work on it and make it a really fine stub nib, but because this was a gift, and because these nibs are kind of irreplaceable, I mean, I could replace it with just a silver steel nib. I didn't want to mess this up, But I was playing with it today before this video, and I said, I'm going to try it. I've taken fine preppy nibs, platinum preppies, and I've made them into stubs, and I love those nibs. I love the character that it gives the nib, so I did it. I don't know if you can see it here, but the downstrokes are a little bit wider than the side strokes, and it might not be very noticeable to anyone else looking at my writing, but as I'm writing, I can see that little stubbiness, and it's just makes it so much more enjoyable to write with. And to make it into a stub, I had to break out my whetstone, and I used the ceramic stone for just some finer tuning, and I used my micro mesh for some final smoothing. Now, I also had some water here handy, and now I just love this. I love writing with this. And this is the pen I'm going to leave inked up. I'm not going to clean it out. It is full of Murasaki Shikibu. And I'm going to enjoy writing with this for a little while. And finally, I've got my Penlux Masterpiece Grande with the golden crystal material. I believe that's what it was called. It's a piston filler. I'm just going to tighten that down a little bit. It's inked up with the Pen Show exclusive ink from KWZ. I got one with a broad nib. I had intended to get it worked on, have it ground into some kind of interesting nib, but I tested it the night that I bought it and decided I wanted to keep it a broad nib for a little while, maybe get it ground into something else if I decide that I don't want to keep it broad long term. But I have it inked up with the KWZ St. Louis Pen Show exclusive ink for 2024. It was called Big Muddy, and okay, I wrote with it yesterday. Okay, it hard started a little bit over here, but you see I got it going. I think it's going to be okay. I've had a little bit of trouble with this, and the problem is, I'm quite sure the problem is just the ink. This ink has a ton of shimmer in it. Let me see if I can show you. Look at that down here. And some shimmer inks that I've used in the past, they will be shimmery when you first start writing with them, and then the shimmer kind of settles in there. This is always shimmery. The shimmer never settles out or whatever. But I think it does kind of clog up the feed. And so even when you write with it every day, it kind of skips a little bit. I have to go over letters multiple times. But let me go ahead and write the name of this down. Like that, like on P's, the very first, if your very first stroke is a downstroke, usually it will skip. Let me see. I'm going to do the name of the ink in reverse. The reverse writing is enough thinner or enough finer than the regular writing that you get some nice variation there. Like you can use one for headers and one for regular writing. Though, I always hear that it's not good to write too much in reverse, but I've done it with several of my pens and haven't had much trouble. You don't want to do it if you write very heavy-handed. But this has been, you see a little skip there, skip there. So I've inked this up twice, and it seems to be getting a little bit worse with this second fill. I think the ink is building up, or the shimmer is building up in the feed. So I'm going to clean this out, and I think I'm going to stay away from shimmer inks probably in all my pens, really. They look pretty, but I'm just not a fan of the hassle. I think I'm going to ink this up with KWZ Honey. I think that would be a nice ink to pair with this. So I'm eager to use an ink that doesn't have the issues with the shimmer, but I'm not going to do that until I've written with my VAC 700 for a while. I'm going to write with this for a little while. I'm just excited by the custom grind that I have on this nib now. It reminds me, the line variation that I get on this nib now, or with the writing from this nib, reminds me of the little flex nib on my Pocket Ritma. It had just enough line variation that I could notice it as I was writing and just really enjoyed it. That's what this reminds me of now. And this nib is so pretty. I enjoy looking at it. I like the plastic section on this one. I can see how it might be a little bit narrow for some people, but for me, it's enjoyable. I'm liking it. But the rest of these pens, I'm going to go clean them out so I don't have to worry about trying to write a little bit with them each day. I can just enjoy my VAC 700 from now. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.